What's up, hobby friends, and welcome to my Horus Heresy list building with Blood Angels video. I do want to caveat that while I do approach this from the lens of the Blood Angels Legion, I do think that you can take a large number of the core concepts and ideas and apply it to a lot of the other legions. Blood Angels do have a specific way of play, and I think that their legion trait, as well as their special units, do create some unique solutions to some of the problems I find in the Horus Heresy game. I think that being said, you can still walk away with a lot of information and knowledge if you play another legion. So let's just dive right on in. One of the first things I always want to think about when I'm approaching a game is to understand how to win the game. How are the missions determined? What are my objectives? How do I score points? Because that dictates how I have to build my list and approach the missions in order to score victory points and ultimately emerge the victor. So if you haven't already, I do highly recommend that at minimum you read through the 6 missions in the core rulebook. Horus Heresy is a pretty broad narrative game. You're going to have a lot of fan-made missions out there. They also periodically release exemplar missions on the Warhammer community website, and then of course you may create missions for your own within your own gaming group. So of course the 6 missions in the core rulebook are by no means definitive. If your group plays with a larger number of missions, then you'll want to make sure that you understand those as well. Think about how you need to score points, because that dictates your balance of scoring and denial units versus killing power. With all that being said, one of the core concepts that you have to understand with Horus Heresy is how high variance objective scoring tends to be. If you've played the previous edition of Horus Heresy, or you play Warhammer 40k either currently or previous editions or Age of Sigmar, you'll know that the previous games used to always focus on numbers, whether it was objective secured or non-objective secured, scoring versus non-scoring. Whoever had the most models on an objective controlled the objective. Not so in Horus Heresy 2.0. In this current edition, it is all or nothing. It doesn't matter how many scoring models you have on an objective, a single enemy scoring or denial model, not unit, model, will deny you the objective entirely. So it's important to understand that you not only need to control an objective or a zone, you need to make sure that there are no enemy models anywhere near that objective or zone if you ever want to score a point. So looking at the objectives, the long and short of it is, yes, it's important to have scoring. Having line is incredibly useful. You want to make sure that you have enough units that can deny as well because of the all or nothing nature of objectives. But at the end of the day, it's all about killing, and because there is no margin of victory, if you focus on tying the primary objectives and then just scoring points with secondaries, that'll win you the game. So, providing a brief overview of the actual Blood Angels Legion, and I don't want to deep dive into each of these individual things. I just want to give my perspective or opinion on each element of this and how it impacts list building. So the Blood Angels trait and reaction are fairly straightforward. Probably one of the better ones in all of Horus Heresy, I think. Loyalist and Traitor. Not the best, but certainly not the worst. If I had to rank it, I would definitely say it's low A tier, high B tier. It makes you strong in the first round of combat that you charge, and you get the benefit whether you're disordered or not. And then your once per game reaction is actually really, really good because it affords you a charge without an enemy reaction, and it also gives you the ability to shroud. I do think that this Legion trait is fairly one-dimensional. It only procs in that single first round of combat when you're charging. And so if you're not playing for those first round charges, your Legion plays like any other generic Legion, and you're getting no benefit outside of that first turn of combat. In terms of the Rites of War, you've got 2 of them. Day of Sorrows is good, but it does have some very strong interactions or negatives that do dictate the way you play the game. And I think if you don't build your list around it, can make the game pretty hard to play. The biggest one, not being allowed to have reserves. You can't have things in Deep Strike, drop pod assault, you can't outflank, and you can't subterranean assault. It means that you're playing an honest game, you have to run towards your opponent, and certain units that are slower need transports to get in there, otherwise you're just taking a lot of fire as you try and close the gap. That said, the pros of this are very, very strong, and it allows you to turn non-line units into scoring line units when they hit 50% or below, which really plays into objectives. So I think if you build your army to take advantage of that, Day of Sorrows is a very strong rite of war. Day of Revelation is essentially a modified Deep Strike Assault. Very, very niche, and I think it has all of the pros and cons of Deep Strike Assault. Effectively, you negate the reserve roll because you determine which turn your assault comes in, turn 2, 3, or 4, and then the first unit doesn't scatter. The problem is because you place the token down for where your first unit drops, and because your opponent knows what turn you're coming in, you've essentially telegraphed it. If they block your token, you're now back to a regular Deep Strike Assault where you scatter and everything places around it within 12 inches, and then you still don't bypass the chance to be disordered. If your opponent doesn't bring a Master of Signal, you have a 1 in 6 chance of being disordered. If your opponent does, it increases to a 50%. I think that the moment you're disordered, a Deep Strike Assault falls apart. Your opponent being able to put everything 24 inches back and then clumping them if they have Scorpiuses or other blast weapons basically fucks your army. And as a bit of a tangent, I think that Day of Revelation, because it forces everything into a Deep Strike Assault, suffers a lot more from disordering, and if your opponent chooses to bring a Master of Signal. Because a Deep Strike Assault, the first unit is never disordered, if you only drop one unit, you sort of bypass or negate some of those negatives by not risking other units in the Deep Strike Assault. Day of Revelation doesn't give you that choice. Everything that can Deep Strike has to be assigned to Deep Strike Assault. So I think that if you do want to play a Deep Striking game, you're better off not taking this Rite of War. So at minimum, you have the option of how many units you want to Deep Strike. In terms of Warlord traits, I think you have 2 really strong ones, especially if you play the Loyalists, and then a pretty mediocre traitor one. Paragon of Unity as a +1 leadership across the board, as long as you have line of sight to the Warlord. Really, really good, especially when you have a lot of things that pin. This, in combination with Day of Sorrows, making your entire army stubborn near or on objectives, either markers or zones, is really, really powerful versus things that cause pinning, and that I'll talk about later in the problems slide. So if you're building an all-comers list and you don't know how you want to play your army, this is probably your go-to Warlord trait, and it works for both Loyalists and Traitors. If you're playing Loyalists and you want to play around the idea of deep striking or using fear and pinning to lock down enemy units, then Carmine Paladin is, I think, an incredibly strong Warlord trait. Basically, for every combat that your Warlord wins or takes part in that is winning, you gain fear +1. Starts off at 1, caps off at 4. So as the game progresses and the more combats you win, the stronger it gets, especially if you bring a lot of units and weapons that can pin, and especially if you Deep Strike Assault. And I'll talk about it later when we talk about Dawnbreakers, as well as combining with other, units or abilities. So really, really strong. Thrall of the Red Thirst, I think, is incredibly niche. It gives the Warlord and their unit +2 attacks instead of +1 when they charge. But if the charge is disordered, they lose the benefit. So pretty trash. I would just go to Paragon of Unity or bring one of the core Warlord traits. For the Armory, I think Perdition weapons are good if you don't have access to fists, either Power Fists or Chain Fists, or Thunder Hammers. Thunder Hammers in particular because you're double strength, AP 2, and you're already brutal 2. I think if you have the option to take those, you bring those. Otherwise, bring Perdition weapons. And of the Perdition weapons you can bring, I do think the Perdition Axe is the best because it brings guaranteed AP 2, it's strength 6, and brutal 2. I think Infernal Pistols are overpriced, and you're not paying extra points, but I do think Plasma's better, largely because I think the range of an Infernal Pistol is awful. 6 inches, 3 inches for the Melta means that if you're not deep striking, or with a jump pack, you're probably never going to use it. So I would save the points and either take the Plasma Pistol or don't bring a special pistol at all. Assault cannons are decent, they're great firepower, and you can fish for rending on 6s. But the problem is I think they're absurdly priced for vehicles, so I would largely save this for infantry or dreadnoughts. The 3 special units that we can bring they range from strong to niche. I think Dawnbreakers are, in my opinion, one of the top 5 special units in the game, both for loyalists and traders. Weapon skill 5, jump pack, 2 wound with a 2-up save is stupid good. They're also not terribly expensive at 25 points a model. The downside is, outside of rending 5+, there is no reliable AP2 apart from the Perdition Axe that you can put on the Sergeant. And I do recommend that you bring melta bombs so that you can threaten heavy vehicles and dreadnoughts. Crimson Paladins are an interesting Terminator unit, largely because they've got some pretty good things for killing 3+ infantry and for tanking hordes of basic models, but they fall apart against elite units or other Terminators that bring Chain Fists, Power Fists, and Thunder Hammers. The -1 to wound with their Coriolis shields is neat. You bump a 2 to a 3+, but they're still getting a lot of wounds through, and every save that you fail, instant kills you, which bypasses your feel no pain. Additionally, Paladin units, especially big units, don't have access to a lot of Power Fists, Chain Fists. So I don't think, given the points, I would take Crimson Paladins over regular Terminators. I think if you're trying to kill regular infantry, you bring Dawnbreakers. If you're going for elite infantry, 2+ saves, dreadnoughts, you bring regular Terminators, probably Cataphracti with Chain Fists and Thunder Hammers. That said, if you do run the Day of Sorrows, these become non-compulsory troops and they also gain line. So with a specific list in a specific build, Crimson Paladins do rise in value. I think the Incandescent Dreadnought is good if you Deep Strike Assault, less good if you're just running at your opponent, outside of that one turn where you can activate your booster to move an extra 4 inches and charge a little bit further. There's an interesting rules as written interaction, which I don't know if it's intended, but raw, you really can't argue. Regular Contemptor Dreadnoughts and Leviathan Dreadnoughts actually have a line in their profile that says they add +1 attack to their profile when they are equipped with 2 fists, and this is not the +1 attack bonus that you get from having 2 close combat weapons equipped. Incandescent Dreadnoughts don't have that caveat, so they actually have 1 less attack than their Contemptor Dreadnought equivalents. I think this is an oversight, and they should be on par. It'll require an FAQ, but until they do, they actually have 1 less attack, and that's the way we're playing it, so come fight me. I think they're really strong in a Deep Strike Assault. They can get stuck in there and they can tie things up. Otherwise, bring regular Dreadnoughts. That being said, there is a benefit because they do take a fast attack slot, so if you're bringing a lot of Veterans, Angels Tears, if you're bringing a lot of Dawnbreakers, Incandescents do rise in value. They just don't bring guns. And then finally, just briefly touching on Primarchs and special characters, our group has chosen not to play with special characters, and we don't bring Primarchs at 3,000 points or less, which is the majority of the games we play one-on-one, and then in team games we're usually playing like 1,500 to 2,000 points per player. We haven't hit 4,000 or 5,000 points yet, but we do bring Primarchs. Can't really comment a lot on them, but having read through all of the Primarchs, I do think that Sanguinius is decent. He's not the strongest, he's not the worst, probably middle tier, and I do think that his lack of hit and run does feel a little weird, given that I think Corvus Corax and then Conrad Kurz both have hit and run as well. Feels kind of weird. I think Ralduran's a pretty cool Praetor, opens up a lot of interesting Warlord trait interactions, although he can't take any of the Blood Angels traits, and then he doesn't have a jump pack, so you do need to put him with a foot-slogging unit of Despoilers, or you put him in a transport. So in this slide and the next slide, we're going to talk very briefly about some of the problems that I am encountering with Horus Heresy, and I'm currently Rubik's Cubing my way through, and then some of the solutions that I've found to tackle these problems. The problem slide that you're seeing right now on the screen is, I think, something that every Legion encounters. So this is not Legion specific. When I get to talking about the solutions, I will be tackling them from the lens of the Blood Angels. But for now, I think every Legion can basically take some of these ideas in terms of the problems that they're encountering and apply it to their own Legion. Now, these are the 6 biggest ones that I think are a problem in Horus Heresy. If you have more, or if you have others, or if you disagree, drop your comments below. I would love to generate a discussion and get a wider perspective from other gaming groups. So the first one, and these are in no particular order, they're not strongest to weakest, these are just problems I've listed. The first is Terminator blocks. And I'm not talking about the small 5-man or 3-man command squads or support units. I'm talking about the big, chunky 10-man Terminator blocks. They're typically cataphracti, so they've got a 2-up armor save, 4-up invuln save. They're probably armed all with power fists or chain fists and or thunder hammers in some variety. And then as a tangent, Iron Warrior's Tyrant Siege are particularly egregious because they also bring incredible firepower with them. I think they're a problem unit because they're incredibly durable. Outside of Tyrant Siege, they're weapon skill 5, they're 2 wounds, they've got that 2-up, 4-up, and they do a ton of damage, which necessitates either bringing your own Terminator squad to fight them, or you're looking at having to shoot them apart, thin them out before you fight them with your own combat unit to try and even the odds. I think most units that fight Terminators are either going to tar pit them forever, or you're going to trade. I think Dreadnoughts are a combination of incredible stats. I don't want to call it a loophole, but they're not vehicles and they're not infantry, so they have a lot of rules benefits that work in their favor, where anti-tank can struggle against them. And then there is a balance issue, in my opinion, with their points cost that makes them incredibly, I don't want to call them overpowered, but they're incredibly points efficient. So they all have a 2+ armor save and a 5+ invuln from the automatic shielding. They're all high toughness. Contemptors and Daredales are toughness 7, Leviathans are toughness 8, and they have a lot of wounds. Contemptors and Daredales are 6 wounds, and Leviathans are 7 wounds. Because their points costs are so cheap, they are, as I mentioned, incredibly efficient, and they're incredible value for what they bring. They fight very well, they shoot well depending on the guns they bring, and they solve a lot of problems, while also creating a lot of problems. I think more than any unit on this list, you need to have an answer for fighting Dreadnoughts. The answer can be you bring your own Dreadnought, but chances are you're going to trade if you can get there. I'm going to skip talking about Whirlwinds and Primarchs as units first, because I do want to talk about a couple of rules, I think, in Horus Heresy that do create problems before pivoting back to them. So the first is precision shots. So precision shots essentially means that for wound allocation, instead of your opponent allocating it, you as the active player allocate where those wounds go. I think they're fairly easy to get. They're usually on weapons that rend, or in the case of special units, are AP2 entirely, and they cannot be avoided. In the case of multi-wound characters that aren't independent characters, they can also create wound allocation complications, where it makes it easier for subsequent wounds to then focus on squad leaders or special weapon models to eliminate them. Why I think they're a problem is there is a lack of interplay versus how prevalent they are becoming, at least in our current gaming group, within the Horus Heresy meta. The fact that they can't be avoided and there is a high chance that they're AP2 means that single wound characters like Apothecaries can pick up very, very easily for no counterplay at all. And even Centurions and Praetors, because they're only 2 and 3 wounds, are super easy to kill. And like, you can do nothing about it apart from hiding in line of sight and or either pinning or killing that unit beforehand, which I'll talk about in the next slide. I think you need to be aware of the fact that characters, especially with precision shots, do not last very long in this game. I also think pinning is an incredible problem and also solution in this game. It entirely shuts down a unit and it leaves them vulnerable because they can't evade. which means that further firepower on that unit can do a lot of damage. The Telepathy Discipline and then Thousand Suns are particularly egregious for this because their hallucinations is a modifier that can't be avoided, and it's so easy to throw out and pin a unit at range, it's ridiculous. Pivoting back to units, the third and final unit I think that is a problem, largely because of its points cost, is the Scorpius Whirlwind. They're cheap, they don't require line of sight, they fire a large blast, and because it's strength 8, it is instant death to most infantry. And if they don't move, they gain rending 4+, and they pin. For the low points of 125 points for the first model, and then 105 for every additional vehicle you add to the squadron, I think Scorpius Whirlwinds are incredibly unbalanced, more so than Dreadnoughts. You need to be able to deal with them at range. Unless you choose to Deep Strike Assault, which can be negated by an effective Bubble Wrap, you need to have ranged shooting to be able to kill Whirlwinds. It being a large blast is also a problem because the current rules of Horus Heresy do not differentiate levels. When you drop a blast template, it hits every model in a building on every floor. It makes blast weapons incredibly powerful, and you have to be aware of this when you try and counter deploy. Cover saves are helpful. However, if you stack in a building, you're going to take a lot more hits. And then finally, Primarchs. Even the most mediocre of Primarchs will skew a game, especially if you're playing under 3,000 points. And I think that you need to have an honest conversation with your opponents on whether you're using Primarchs or not. If they bring one and you don't bring an answer to them, whether it's your own or units that can deal with them, the game becomes unfun to play. So it's a problem, but it's a selective problem because it comes down to your opponent or your opponents and your gaming group and what you determine is an acceptable level to play a Primarch at. And it's about that social contract about, are we bringing Primarchs? Our group has chosen not to at 3,000 points or less, so we've bypassed this problem entirely. They're, broadly speaking, very powerful. They're great in combat. They've got precision shots with really great weapons, so they combine a lot of the above problems with being incredible units, and they're hard to kill. So when it comes to solutions, I do want to caveat this is not a definitive list, but these are some of the ideas or ways I think that you can combat each of these problem units or problem rules. So Terminator blocks, if you want to try and shoot them, you can either try and pin them to lock them down and make them ineffective, or kill them outright. Maybe even a combination of both. You can try and pin them with pinning weapons like Nemesis Bolters or units with Sniper. Vigilators are really good for this because they also have Shell Shock. And Scorpius Whirlwinds. You can also look at trying to kill them with heavy weapon squads running all last cannons because they're strength 9 AP2, so you can instant kill them. Predators and Javelins with melta guns on last cannons. Melta-Lance Leviathans because they can shoot them and then fight them. And then maybe tanks like the Sakaran Arcus, which can bring a lot of strength 8 AP2 firepower. And then you're looking at Leviathan Dreadnoughts or equivalent Terminator blocks in combat. So you're arming them with Power Fists, Chain Fists, or Thunder Hammers to try and fight them. And again, chances are you're going to trade. I don't think that you're going to wipe them all out without taking severe casualties in return. So just accept that I think Terminators are a trading unit. You're going to have to trade something to kill them. You can fight Dreadnoughts in the same way that you kill Terminators. So with shooting, you can look at last cannon squads, Predators and Javelins that bring last cannons and melta guns or melta cannons, Melta-Lance Leviathans, and Sakaran Arcuses with a lot of strength 8 AP 1 and 2 firepower. Rending is also really, really good against Dreadnoughts. Rending becomes AP2 and it auto wounds, so you bypass their armor and their high toughness. So you're looking at Nemesis Bolters, Assault Cannons are really, really good for this. In a pinch, Whirlwinds for plinking wounds. I also think Plasma Guns can be really, really good. While they're not rending, they are high strength, so usually 7 with a breaching 4+. So against Contemptors and Derrideos, you can wound on a 4+, and if you wound them, you become AP2. On a 5+, you're wounding and you're AP2 against Leviathans. Not ideal, but still pretty good at bypassing that 2+ save. Dreadnoughts in combat, if you have Gravis Fists, are also really, really good. AP2, high strength, brutal 3, means you're going to kill them, but chances are because you fight at the same initiative, they're going to kill you back. Because you are a Blood Angel, being +1 to wound is also a benefit, especially against Leviathans. Getting that +1 to wound can mean that you're wounding on a 3+ or even a 2+, which could give you the edge in terms of damage. Terminator blocks are also really, really good because you have Power Fists, Chain Fists, and Thunder Hammers. So high strength, AP2, potentially brutal 2. And then Melta Bombs are incredibly strong. Dawnbreakers and in a pinch Angel's Tears can take Melta Bombs for their entire unit at a very low points cost. And because they inflict instant death, can be incredibly strong at taking out Dreadnoughts, but accepting the fact that you may lose up to half your unit. So as an example, you're going to have, for example, 10 Dawnbreakers. You're going to charge let's say a Leviathan Dreadnought. It's got 5 attacks. It's going to go first. Because they're equal weapon skill, he'll hit you 3, maybe 4 times. He'll probably kill 2 or 3 of them. And then you're going to have 6 or 7 that will fight back. You're hitting on 4s, so you'll get 3, maybe 4 hits. Your strength 8, but you have the +1 wound to charge if you're charging them. So you're wounding on a 3+. And then if they fail to save, you're doing D3 wounds. So great way to potentially one-shot a Leviathan, especially if you can soften them up before you charge on in. When it comes to playing around precision shots, there's not a lot you can do in terms of offensive counterplay. You have to try and kill or pin them first. Otherwise, they're just going to wreak havoc and do what they want to do. Defensively, because you have to be in range and line of sight to be able to allocate precision fire, you can use terrain and range to your advantage, but that's pretty much it. I think units that can move and fire, that can precision shot or pin are incredibly useful. It's why I like Relentless units that can get Nemesis Bolters. War Winds are strong because they're out of line of sight. You can also use things like Derrideos with the Aeolus missile launcher because it can pin outside line of sight. And then you can combo this with units or rules that can lower leadership to increase the chance of pinning. So you can soften up and kill those units before they wreak havoc on your army. And it's the same thing with pinning. The only real offensive counterplay is to kill or pin them first. When it comes to defensive counterplay against pinning, there's really only 2 options. I guess 3 technically if you can keep them out of line of sight or range. The first is to be fearless. So using Herald or having innate fearless, which we don't really have as Blood Angels. Or be stubborn and or inexorable. When you're stubborn, you ignore all leadership modifiers. So we're talking about Shell Shock and Fear as the 2 biggest ones. And this is where the Day of Sorrow's Rite of War is incredibly powerful because it gives you stubborn around objectives, and the way I interpret it, rules is written around objective zones. And then inexorable, being a Terminator, you ignore leadership modifiers, although you can still be feared. Note that you still are susceptible to the telepathy power hallucinations, which is not a leadership modifier, but it adds to the dice roll of your leadership roll. So you can still be quote unquote modified. It's just not a modifier to your leadership. To be fearless, you can use Herald and the way that they can join and leave units to play around it. And effectively, if you have a Herald sitting between 2 units joined to 1, he makes 1 unit fearless, which means that they're immune pinning. And then if the other unit beside them becomes pinned, that Herald can then leave and join that unit in their movement phase, which then makes that unit now fearless, and it removes their pinning. There's a bit of a way to play around that. It requires a bit of finesse, but there are ways to get a bit of fearless into your army. To play against Whirlwinds, honestly, in shooting, you gotta shoot them first. You're going for units that can move and shoot, so Predators with las cannons and multi-cannons, even Predator autocannons, although Strength 8 against Armor 13, you're hoping for Rendings. Javelins with las cannons, Sakaar and Arcuses as an example. Basically anything that can move and fire with heavy guns to get around to the flanks, the softer side armor, or just haul them out on their Armor 13 on the front. You want to kill them before they kill you, or try and stun lock them. If you can force a unit to snap fire, they can no longer fire their blast, which severely hampers whirlwinds. In combat, pretty much anything you try and reach them with will kill them. You can use crack grenades for strength 6 if you're fighting the back armor, or if you got combat units, you've got power axes, you've got strength 6, Dawnbreaker lances, things like that, but you have to reach them first. Deep Strike Assault can be very useful, but a canny opponent will bubble wrap them, so really the most effective way to kill a whirlwind is via ranged. Either you kill the vehicle or you stun lock them. And then finally, Primarchs. You've had the conversation with your opponent, you've both agreed to either bring Primarchs or you know that your opponent is bringing a Primarch, and you'll have tools hopefully on hand to try and deal with them. And realistically, I think there are only 3. The first is to tarp it with your own Primarch. You'll probably lose with as Sanguinius to about half the Primarchs in the game, or you'll lock them down forever. Most of them, apart from Conrad, Kurz, and Horax, don't have hit and run, so if they flee combat, you can run them down with a jump pack and just keep locking them down, and you essentially remove each other from the game. You can bring Terminator blocks. A 10-man Terminator block might not kill a Primarch, at least not quickly enough, but it will lock them down long enough for you to focus on your opponent's army and focus on the objective, especially if it's the minion and your score objective points throughout the game. That or you accept your fate. Accept that the Primarch will kill a unit a turn, but that a Primarch can't be everywhere. They're really, really good at killing one thing, and apart from some that are good at force multiplying, they can't be everywhere at once, so let them do their thing, focus on the rest of the game. A Primarch is a lot of points. You're looking at 350 to 500 points, potentially even a little bit more on the more expensive side, so it does give you room to bring extra toys. And then finally, just briefly talking about spamming versus a more combined arms list. So when I talk about spam, I don't necessarily just mean of a particular unit, and I think our most egregious one is Dawnbreakers, which, caveat, I'm also guilty of, but also of a particular unit type. So you're either bringing all infantry or all jump infantry, all dreadnoughts, or all vehicles. Spam lists tend to be very good at doing one thing or a limited number of things, but weak against or trying to do many other things. And units or armies that are effective at killing a particular unit type or a particular unit become increasingly efficient versus your own army unless you can overwhelm them quickly. I will caveat that I think for team games or multiplayer games where you can coordinate lists with your allies, a spam list can work because essentially each player as part of a team is bringing their army to do a certain thing. And then the goal is that in the aggregate, all of the players in a team will essentially make up a combined arms army overall. Plus, I think with a combined arms army, it's just visually more interesting. You have a lot more units to look at, to paint. It's a lot more fun to collect. You're painting a variety of stuff from infantry, vehicles, dreadnoughts, maybe even a Primarch. You're looking at power armor versus Terminators, things like that. Because your army is more toolbox, while you are less effective at one particular thing, you're also really good at just doing a bit of everything, and you're less vulnerable to certain things that would hamper a particular unit type. So, as a bit of a tangent and just my own experience, when I first built my couple of iterations of my Blood Angels army, I was over-indexing into nothing but Assault Marines or Jump Infantry, and I was bringing a lot of Dawn Breakers. Really, really fast, really mobile, gets in your face, locks units down fast, it doesn't give the opponent time to shoot, and it's essentially in combat where I want to be very quickly. The problem is the army I found through playing, incredibly vulnerable to pinning, incredibly vulnerable to things like whirlwinds. It struggles against a lot of dreadnoughts, and it can't fight Terminators. Right? I can't bring enough range firepower or combat power to kill Terminators effectively, especially big blocks of them. So as more units come out and as I expand my collection, I've veered away from that and brought more combined arms units, which means that less all or nothing, the army is just much more interesting to play. It's more fun for my opponent as well. And I'm less vulnerable to pinning because even if he pins 1 or 2 units, I still have things like my dreadnoughts, I've got some predators, that can't be pinned and can still be effective, right? I don't have to rely on trying to get Dawnbreakers into combat with multi-bombs to kill Whirlwinds or Dreadnoughts. I can shoot them apart with my Predators and my Dreadnoughts. I don't have to fight Terminators anymore. I can just shoot them apart, things like that, you know? The TLDR, don't spam, bring a mixed list, have tools that do different things, that are different things, and spread your combat effectiveness across a variety of units, and you'll find that you're more ready to tackle different objectives and different armies. And losing 1 or 2 units isn't going to just ruin your battle plan. And finally, I'm going to walk you through a sample list, and this is the current 3,000 point list that I am running, that I'm building towards. And you'll see at the top that I've marked it as a fixed all-comers list that doesn't run a Rite of War for flexibility. So what I mean by that is I'm not changing the list from game to game. I've built this list to play all the missions and potentially play against any army list that I could come across that doesn't include a Primarch. I'm also not running a War to War because it gives me the option to pick or choose which units I want to Deep Strike Assault, or if I want to walk up, I have the option to not. It gives me a lot of flexibility without any of the downsides. You could just as easily run this list either as Day of Sorrows or Day of Revelation, but it does require a little bit of tweaking and tailoring to get around some of the weaknesses of those specific Rites of War or play up those strengths. So for example, if I was running Day of Sorrows, I'd probably run more Crimson Paladins just to be scoring line a little bit more durable. Whereas if I was running Day of Revelation, I would be playing, because it is a Deep Strike Assault, I need to make sure that I have ways to kill a Master of Signal very quickly, and I would focus a lot more on deep striking units. Probably a lot more Assault Squads, Dawnbreaker Squads, and the Incandescent Dreadnoughts. So walking briefly through the list, I'll talk through what I have, why I've taken them, and then my general game plan with the army or the way I want to play the game. For my characters, I've got a Praetor, who is my Warlord. He's got the Incarmine Paladin Warlord trait. He's got the Mastercrafted Paragon Blade, Infernus Pistol, and Jump Pack. I've got a Herald with a Perdition Axe, Legion Standard, and a Jump Pack. And then I've got a Vigilator with Nemesis Bolter and then Multi-Bombs. For my elites, I've got 2 squads of 10 Dawnbreakers. Both have champions with the Axe of Perdition. There are stock standard spears and multi-bombs for the unit. And then I've caught 10 veteran legionnaires in a Rhino. Sergeant has Artificer Armor and the Augury Scanner, and they all have Nemesis Bolters. For my fast attack, I have a single Incandescent Dreadnought with double Gravis Power Fists and 2 Multi-Guns. For my troops, I've got 3 10-man assault squads, sergeants with Artificer Armor and either the Axe of Perdition or Power Fists, and then the squads run either double Spear or double Axe. For my heavy support, I've got a Leviathan Dreadnought with the Multi-Lance, 2 Assault Cannons, Phosphix Launcher, and then he has his Siege Claw with a Multi-Gun. I have a Daredevil Dreadnought with the Plasma Cannonade, the Aeolus Missile Launcher, and Twin Heavy Bolter, and then a squadron of 2 Predators with Magnum Multi-Cannons and Sponson Las Cannons. So that's 3,000 points on the dot. When I played Horus Heresy in its first iteration, this would have been 2014, 2015 to 2017, I played Ultramarines, and my list was essentially mid-range support. It was a lot of veteran squads and support squads and heavy support squads in Rhinos, and then you had artillery support with Scorpius Whirlwinds. I wanted to make sure that this current army list had nothing of that, played completely different, and so I've chosen not to include any Scorpiuses, largely because I want something different, and also because I don't think they're fun to play against. I think they're probably the one overpowered unit in the game, and I think they require a points increase. And I also don't want to take too many squads in Rhinos. I also wanted to play into the Bloody Angels sort of jump infantry motif and incorporate the Perdition weapons where I could, and then power axes in particular I think are an iconic Blood Angel weapon. And so I've chosen some what I think are less efficient weapon choices purely for aesthetics. So for example, my Praetor has a Paragon Blade because he comes equipped with the Power Axe, or the Axe weapon. I think a Thunderhammer is probably a little bit better because it's Strength 8 and Brutal 2. But the Paragon Blade does still have Murderous Strike, and it's at initiative, so I don't feel bad having it. I did say in the armory section that the Infernus pistol is subpar. However, because I've equipped my Herald with the Perdition Axe, I have nowhere else to spend it. And then in scenarios where I do Deep Strike Assault with the Praetor, if I can get in range with the Infernus pistol, he can maybe one-shot a character or a Terminator, put some wounds on a Dreadnought or a vehicle. Not a bad way to spend 10 points. The Herald is there to give Fearless to a unit, give Line, particularly to a unit of Dawnbreakers, and then also gives a Fear bubble. And I'll talk about Fear, I think, near the end, because it does key into the way I want to play the game. The Vigilator, in combination with the Veterans, is my way of incorporating some sniper fire, so potentially rending to try and tackle Dreadnoughts, and also precision shot to take out other characters, other Vigilators, Librarians, or Apothecaries. I also take Veterans as opposed to Recon Squads because I like the idea that I can move and shoot. Mobility for me is incredibly important, and I like to be able to move and shoot the units. Additionally, because the Veterans can stay mounted in the Rhino on turn 1, even if I don't get first turn, they're a little safer from being shot or pinned before they get to respond. So there's a little bit of flexibility there. Maybe not the most combat effective choice, but I think in practice, there's that flexibility that I enjoy a lot more than efficiency. Dawnbreakers are, I think, the go-to combat unit for Blood Angels. I would rate them as probably the top 5, at least for me. Other people may rate them differently, but I like them for what they do. The Axe of Perdition gives them some guaranteed AP 2 and some Brutal 2, especially in the challenge. The Perdition Axe is also Strength +2, which makes the Dawnbreaker champion Strength 6 base, and then if you combine that with Furious Charge, making him Strength 7, and then the Blood Angel trait where he's +1 to wound on the turn he charges, he can actually threaten Contemptor and even Leviathan Dreadnoughts in that first round of combat with multi-attack AP2 Brutal 2 weapon outside of the Melt-A-Bomb. And then with the Spears, you're fishing for rending on 5s for AP2. So they're not really terribly effective at killing 2+ armor, but they can in a pinch. They are also Strength 6 on the charge, and then with their +1 to wound, can make them kind of good at killing Dreadnoughts, especially Contemptors. Although against Leviathans, I would still probably switch to Melt-A-Bombs. And then if you're locked in combat with a Dreadnought beyond that first round charging, switch to Melt-A-Bombs. Strength 8, AP 1, your Armor Bane, so you can reroll wounds against Dreadnoughts, and the instant death means that you'll probably do a lot of damage with just a handful of them. The 3 10-man assault squads are... I don't expect them to live very long, especially if I Deep Strike Assault. They're there to absorb Overwatch reactions. So I do have them equipped to make them somewhat of a threat to draw fire, but I don't expect them to live long enough to be combat effective. So what they are armed with is really, I have it modeled a certain way more purely for aesthetics, and so I'll just throw it up there. I think the Sergeant with the Axe of Perdition should probably be a Power Fist, and the Power Spears should probably be Power Axes so they can threaten Armor 2 as well, but they're still good at killing Marines, so I don't really feel bad with them. Their main goal in life is to go in there first, absorb the reaction, and soften up a target for my Dawnbreakers and for my Praetor and Dreadnoughts. The Incandescent Dreadnought, Leviathan Dreadnought, and then my Daredevil Dreadnought and Predators are my answers to killing other Dreadnoughts, Terminators, and then targeting certain units at range that I can't reach, either from Deep Strike Assault or running at them. So we're mainly looking at Whirlwinds, Sicarans, Predators, and then other shooting Dreadnoughts, Leviathans, Daredevils, and Contemptors that have either 1 or 2 guns. I don't want to bring Terminator squads because they're slow. I don't want to Deep Strike them. I don't want to paint them. I don't like the way they look. And I don't want to invest in transports. So because Dawnbreakers can't reliably kill 2+ saves, I do end up relying on my Dreadnoughts to do a lot of the heavy lifting. Leviathan with his Multi-Lance, Multi-Gun, and Phosphoric Launcher, really good at killing Terminator squads, and in a pinch, I can trade him for other Leviathans. The Daredevil has a Strength 8 Plasma Blast that is rending on a 4+, so he can instant kill on and then on a 4+ can bypass the 2+ save of Terminators as well. And then in combination with the missile launcher can also throw out some pinning. Predators have a mix of las cannons and multi-guns, so they're killing vehicles, dreadnoughts, and Terminators at will, at ranged. And then my incandescent dreadnought can also deep strike assault. I can choose to threaten something either singly, or if I deep strike everything all at once, throw him in the mix and really just get stuck in, target other Terminators, tie them down for a turn. He won't kill a 10-man squad, but a 5-man squad he may actually do some damage to. Or I can go in and just kill a vehicle squadron, no problem. So the way that I want to play the game with this army is not so much overt killing power, but a combination of locking things down with pinning, and then picking and choosing what I kill every turn, either from shooting or combat. So I've got my fire base of dreadnoughts from the Leviathan, the Daredale, and the Predators, basically targeting heavy things that I need to kill right out of the bat, and it depends on what I'm playing. Chances are I'll prioritize Scorpiuses and other Predators, and then Dreadnoughts, and then Terminators, although if they're Tyrant Siege, those go up on the list. At the same time, I'll be combining that with Fear, Shell Shock, and Pinning, just either from Fear Bubbles or also from Deep Strike Assaults, to try and lock down units that I don't want to fight right away. I've got two options or two ways to do this. So the first is if I choose to Deep Strike Assault. At the minimum, I've got the Praetor, the Herald, and a unit of Dawnbreakers who can Deep Strike in. And if they're not stubborn or inexorable, can essentially inflict a -2 leadership to your pin tests. -1 from the Dawnbreakers, and then -1 from the Fear from the Herald and the Praetor. They can lock down a large area, which also turns off reactions, and then that means I've bought myself a turn of units that are basically combat effective. I can charge into other things, kill them, and start racking up the Fear. Once I get the Praetor to Fear 2, 3, or even 4 from winning combats, he's got this incredible 12-inch bubble. I guess it would be 24-inch because it's a 12-inch radius, where pinning from my Vigilator, from my Veteran Legionnaires, as well as the missile launcher from my Daredale can continually lock down units that aren't stubborn or fearless, and just wreak havoc in the backline while I'm running rampant through them. If I choose not to Deep Strike Assault and I run at them, I can still kind of do the same thing, it's just a little harder. I've got the Vigilator who's got Shell Shock, and then pinning again from the Vigilator and the Veterans with the Nemesis Bolters, as well as the missile launchers. Laying down the covering fire, and then once my Praetor and Herald get in there, they'll add their Fear Bubble to the mix. It's essentially a delayed Deep Strike Assault if they can get there. It's the same thing, it's just a little less effective for that. I think the list, if you do choose to take Terminators, you can probably swap out Dawnbreakers for them. If you want to take Scorpiuses, you'll probably drop the Daredale because it does a lot of the same thing. And then for narrative reasons, as a loyalist and because of the Council of Nicaea, I've chosen also to not take a Librarian. But if you wanted to incorporate some Librarian telepathy into your army list, you could probably drop the Vigilator. You'd swap out precision killing power for almost guaranteed pinning lockdown. So that's 6 of one, half dozen of another sort of trade-off. At 3,000 points, I think is the threshold for whether you want to include a Primarch or not. It eats up a lot of points. Again, in our group, we don't take them. So all of our 3,000 point lists are geared very differently because we don't have to deal with a Primarch. If you know that one is incoming and you've had that conversation with your opponents, I think your list does change drastically. And it's something you have to consider. You're either bringing your own Primarch or it's a must to bring 10 Terminators. And that about sums up this video, I think. All I really want to do is cover sort of a high-level approach to list building, start to break down some of the missions and perceived problems and potential solutions that you may have with Horus Heresy in general, and then specifically list building with the Blood Angels. This is by no means a definitive or exhaustive list. I don't think I'm a tabletop guru or master tactician by any means, but I still think that there are some insights that can be gleaned that can apply to your own list building, whether you play Blood Angels or any other legion. So I hope that you're able to gain something and apply it to your own list building, and maybe it'll give you some more insight into how to approach the game. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed, give it a like, and subscribe for more weekly content. If you want to check out my other social media platforms, I'll make sure to have links in the video description below. And as always, until next time, happy hobbying.